Hey Rebels, today we're going to discuss our RPE scales. I wanted to share a little bit more information around those because, it's been coming up from time to time that I think that these aren't always as well understood as they could be. And if we can shed some more light on those, help you understand them a little bit better, it's going to be another thing that helps you get even more out of each of your workouts and training sessions. So we're going to start by talking about RPEs that we will apply to our work capacity. So, our workout of the day, our endurance work, where we're really focused on training energy systems, and then I'll touch on more our RPEs when we apply them to our strength training and how they're a little bit different. So when we think about applying these to work capacity, we're largely looking at how different energy systems are getting used, and depending on the intensity that we're working at, that is what's going to really dictate what energy systems we're working within. A common misconception is that RPE is like a rating or a scale on how hard or how challenging a workout is, and this just isn't the case. An example of this is that an RPE of 10 is something that's going to be performed at a very short duration. Now that might be really painful and it might really be something challenging, but more often than not, where you're going to find most of the workouts that are really grueling, really challenging, is they're probably falling somewhere between an RPE 6 and an RPE of 8 or 9, depending on if it's intervals and there's significant rest. So don't be fooled into thinking that something that's written as an RPE of 5 or an RPE of 6 should feel really easy. That's not the case. It just means that when we're focused on that kind of RPE, in terms of the time frame, it's going to be a longer time domain that we're working for. And if we're sustaining a challenging effort for that duration, you can bet your bottom dollar that it's still going to be a really challenging stimulus in that workout. So RPE of 10, this is something short. It's like under a minute, probably more like 10 to 30 seconds of effort. If we were to think about a 100-meter sprint compared to a 5-kilometer run, a 100-meter sprint, you are putting absolutely everything into that. And after 100 meters, your pace is going to rapidly drop off because you can't sustain that kind of speed for more than, say, 100 meters. You might be able to hold it for 120, but by 150 to 200 meters, it's going to drop off significantly. Okay, and if I wanted to repeat a 100-meter sprint at maximal effort, I'm going to need to have a lot of rest. Okay, probably at least 5 minutes, maybe even 10 minutes to be able to have a similar effort. If I'm working more like an RPE of 7 or 8, I can probably repeat that effort with a lot less rest. Okay, but again, we're talking about 10 being absolutely maximal. So not a lot of workouts where we'll put an RPE of 10 unless it's a very short amount of work followed by just that one effort or followed by a significant amount of rest. RPE 9, we're now looking at that falling in sort of that 1 to 2 minute zone. So this will come up from time to time, thinking pairs, interval-based training, teams of 3 where you're working really hard for a minute, minute and a half, and then you're getting a similar amount of rest, maybe even a little bit more. This is going to be largely an anaerobic energy zone that we're training. Same with the RPE 10. And then when we start to look at, say, an RPE of 8, an RPE of 7, this is where we spend a lot of time in workouts. This is looking at maybe 6 to 8, maybe even a little bit more of work that we can sustain a high level of intensity. And if we wanted to go beyond that in terms of time duration, we would need to have some set rest in there. So when we have efforts that are like, 4 to 6 minutes long, and we've got a similar sort of amount of rest, or, it might even be like 4 minutes of work, 2 minutes of rest, we might be able to sustain an RPE of 8 for several intervals, 3, 4, maybe even 5, if we're well developed. RPE of 7, RPE of 8, this is largely like your VO2 max. So it's partly aerobic and it's partly anaerobic, and this is where you create a lot of pain in the body when we're working at those kind of intensities. But again, they can't be sustained. Like if we had a 20-minute, 30-minute workout with no programmed rest, you're not actually going to be working in an 8 that whole time. It's probably going to be more like a 5 to maybe a 7 at times. So this is just a rough breakdown for you. You know, when we're in that 5 and 6, this is like lactic threshold zone. So, you know, you will start to get some local muscular fatigue at this point. It's not purely aerobic anymore. When we're working in a 3 to a 4, this is more aerobic. This is something you can sustain for those longer durations, over 30 minutes. But again, if you're working at a 3 to 4 for an hour, that is still going to be quite challenging. So again, don't be fooled by thinking that because it's set at a 3 or 4 or 5 that it means that it's going to be easy. If it's a long duration, that's not necessarily going to be the case. I hope that sheds a little bit more light on that, and do keep in mind with RPEs that their rate of perceived exertion, so they're not 100% accurate. We get that. They also fluctuate for individuals day to day. A 10 for me on one day where I'm feeling recovered and energetic is very different to a 10 on a day where I'm not feeling as energetic and I'm a little bit under recovered, or I've had 2 or 3 hard days of training and maybe a bad night's sleep. So do keep that in mind. They're not a perfect science. They're a guide. They fluctuate with you day to day based on how you're feeling, which is one of the reasons we like to use them. But when it comes to workouts, think about being in those different energy energy system zones, and think about how we're going to be using them, and knowing that most of the time we're between a 5 and an 8. Every now and then we go above, every now and then we go a little bit below. When it comes to thinking about RPE scale for strength, it's a lot different. We're not thinking about energy systems now. It's quite a lot simpler, okay? If I've got an RPE of 10, what that means is that for whatever reps is prescribed, it's an all-out max. So if it's 10 reps that are prescribed, an RPE of 10, it means it's a 10 RM. You could not do 11 reps. If you tried, you would fail. If I have that 10 reps at an RPE of 8, it means that I could probably do actually more like 12 repetitions, okay? So an 8 means plus 2 reps. A 5 would mean around plus 5 reps. So an RPE of 5 for 10 reps would mean I could do that weight for 15, maybe even more repetitions. If it was an RPE of 2, that would mean that I'm going to be able to do that set of 10 weight for 18 plus, maybe even 20 repetitions. Okay, so it is quite different. You can think of this a little bit more of like it's almost closer to like a percentage-based thing. So, you know, RPE of 10 is 100%. RPE of 9 is like around 90%. RPE of 8 is around 80% to 85%, and so on. So a little bit easier to understand from the strength side, and I think most of you do a pretty good job of that, but definitely from the work capacity and the energy system side, I think that understanding that a little bit better will help you apply yourself more in workouts and get more out of those. If you have any questions around this, please don't be shy and reach out to us.